Well, hi, everybody. I'm Bill Bateman, part of the team at OSTA, the Oregon State Tenants Organization. And at the top of my agenda is HB 3054. And there's been a lot going on. The bill is changing even as we speak. And one of the key provisions in the bill has, I think it's gone now. But it's been in, it's been out, it's been a point of contention. So I brought in the big guns. I brought in Angela Garvin, not only past President Emeritus, but head of our floating homes division, and quite the knowledgeable individual who's going to try and explain, as we hope we can explain to our legislators, what this rent reset is all about. Why is this so important? Angela, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell me a little bit about what's going on. One of the provisions in the bill was to limit the amount the rent could be reset to 10%. A counterproposal was a 20% increase. And that made people make funny faces when they heard that, and it was not well accepted by the people in the parks, although the park owners thought it was a pretty good idea. So talk us through, what does this mean? Let's say I'm a buyer and I've decided it's time for me to move because the rent's too high in my park, or we're not happy with how the park is being maintained. Just any number, you're want to be closer to your family up in Portland, any number of reasons to relocate. But what happens when the rent resets? How does that impact the selling price?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really excited when the rent reset topic first appeared in this bill because it's really, really an important issue for park and marina tenants. And I don't think it gets enough airplay because it's more of a complicated topic. So it's really easy to understand when we talk about rent increases. Everybody understands what a rent increase is. They understand what 6% limits or 10% limits are. But rent reset, what is rent reset? It's complex. And so most people don't even experience rent reset until they've made the decision to leave the park or marina. And and I can say it is one of the most terrifying things to go through the sale of your house in a park or marina because this is where the landlord has a lot of power. And it's because of this ability to charge the incoming buyer of your home whatever rent the landlord feels like charging.
So if I decide I'm leaving and my rent is, to keep it simple, $500, and the landlord can say to the new tenant, this is going to be $750 if they wish.
Or 1,000, or to be real, 5,000, because currently the law doesn't limit at all the number that the landlord can charge for incoming rent of the prospective buyer of a current tenant's home. And that's where it gets crazy because here you are, you're dreaming of moving on for whatever reason. You know you have to leave where you are and you're trying to think of a price. And it's really up to the landlord to determine what your asking price can be because it's up to the landlord to decide what the rent is going to be.
Now, don't we have to look at what the market will bear? I have seen there's a park in our area that priced themselves. They were given 2 years, 2 years free rent if you move in here, and they couldn't get people into the building. Now, that shows that they can price themselves out of existence, but what happens to the individuals that get caught in this crossfire?
Well, that's just the thing. Outside of a park or a marina, you do have a freer market. If your apartment landlord charges more than you can afford, you can pack up your bags and your furniture and you can leave. You can find another deal that's good for you. But what's happened in parks and marinas is that most houses cannot be moved. There are no spaces to move them to. And so the only way to get away and make another decision to choose rent that you can afford is to sell your house and leave it. And so that's where that increase in rent that the landlord can charge is it really does need to have some sort of limit that is reasonable and isn't really just about what the landlord wants to get. And when I say that, it's because the way the rest of ORS follows all the other laws that go into Chapter 90, especially the second half, they support the fact that if the tenant cannot afford rent, the current rent, and if they stop paying rent, let's say they get evicted, or let's say they just can't afford it, they don't have it anymore, the landlord can charge whatever they want. Or if they're just selling the house, it doesn't have to be an eviction situation, but they're just selling the house. The landlord can say your rent is $5,000 a month for the incoming buyer. Well, at some point, maybe no one will buy that house. But what happens to a tenant if you don't pay that rent and you get evicted because no one's buying your house? Then the landlord, because of the laws of Chapter 90, gets to take your house and sell it and recoup all the losses that they would have had. So they could, potentially extract $5,000 a month from the value of the house and pay themselves that rent that they asked for. And then you get nothing from your house and you're evicted.
So I hear the $5,000 amount, and I'm thinking, that sounds ludicrous, but it would be legal. It would work. I mean, I have to think, other than getting an attorney, you could actually be stuck if somebody was that blatant. Would they be subject to any kind of repercussions?
Nope. In fact, I mean, this is going a different direction than I thought we were going to go to today, but the reality is that if a landlord decided that they wanted to own all the homes in the park, they could absolutely make the rent $2,000 or $3,000 more than what you're paying now, such that you never have a buyer, such that they can take control of your property when they evict you because you can no longer pay the rent. And they can sell that house and take the money out of it. So if you were a landlord and wanted to own a bunch of houses and sell them and pocket the money, you could legally because there
Well,
is no limit on rent reset.
thank God for the 10% rent rate increase then that's in place. So yay, well done so far. But let's look at what happens, how you can lose money when you're trying to move out due to rent reset.
Yeah. Yes, this is a great topic. This is a complicated topic, and there will be a PDF that you can download. So,
Good.
feel free to follow along with a pen and paper, but you can also download this PDF and follow along with me as well, because I'm going to throw out some numbers. So, the first thing we're going to do to illustrate the impact of what a landlord's rent increase for the rent reset portion will have on a home, on a tenant's home, and the value in that home. We're going to take three people. And so let's suppose that there are three people, person A, person B, and person C, and they all own identical homes in a park or a floating home marina. Okay, so there's nothing that differentiates one home over the other. At this moment, they're all equal, and anyone coming into the park or marina to buy the home would have a hard time deciding because they are completely equal. But let's say currently the slip or space rent for all three homes is $1,100 a month. And I just picked that because a third of all of our respondents on our 2024 fall survey paid between $1,100 and $1,300 a month in space rent. And so let's say that that's the current rent, but then the landlord, just through the annual rent increases, decides to raise the rent by 10%. So now person A and person B and person C will each be paying $1,210. Well, now at this point, some of the park tenants think, oh, well, I can absorb that. That's okay. But these three tenants that I've mentioned, A, B, and C, they've decided that they can no longer afford this kind of a rent increase, right? Because that's squeezing a little too hard, Bill. And so they are preparing to sell their homes in place because, again, that idea of the free market, they can't just pick up their homes and take them to somewhere where the rent is less. So they're going to go ahead and get their homes ready to sell. Let's say, for the sake of argument, just so that we're understanding these numbers, that all three homes, because they're all identical, are all going to be listed at $150,000, just because maybe that's a good market value for the homes in that area, in that condition, and with that particular space or slip rent. So prospective buyers are taking notice and they're looking at all three homes and they're comparing the cost and the value of each home. So let's keep in mind that it doesn't really matter what the asking price is of these homes. The people with the money who are actually deciding to buy or not buy the house are the ones who are going to, in the end, determine what the value of that home is. And they're going to base that value on a lot of different things. Some of those buyers are going to pay cash, and some are going to need some financing. What I'm going to try to do is illustrate how um, with all things being equal, under the scenario in which maybe you have to get some financing, because that is a great way to illustrate the value over time of a rent increase.
Mhm. Right.
So let's say that for the sake of argument, the buyers that are looking at this house are all going to get financing. They're all going to pay about 20% down with the 7% interest rate. And let's say that, again, all these homes are equal. So we're starting currently, everything's equal. But now the landlord notices that there are three people who are getting ready to sell their homes. And so he's starting to think about what will be the rent increase amount I ask on the new buyers of these three homes. So let's say in one scenario for person A, this landlord decides to raise the rent an additional 20%. That's $242 a month for the purchaser of person A's home. And maybe 10%, which is $121 per month for the purchaser of person B's home. And then nothing. He's not going to raise the rent at all for person C's home because he and person C are pals. They like each other. They go way back, they're buddies. So there's going to be no rent reset for his friend. So when we think about the cost that a buyer is going to have to bear, we're going to think of it in terms of that loan payment plus a rent payment, and that's going to equal a total housing payment. So bef before so the loan payment is going to be based on that amount of the asking price and the total amount that's being borrowed. Well, we're going to have to think about the total housing payment, which is affected by the rent. So in the case of person A's home, that total monthly payment has gone from what would have been 2173 a month. Now their payment, that's person A with the 20% rent reset amount, the purchaser of that house is going to now pay $2,415. That's quite a big difference. And person B is going to be paying 2294, while person C is paying the 2173 a month.
So the 2173 is no rent reset, and
Correct.
the 2294 is 10%. And with the 20%, it's 2415. That's quite a range of prices. And there's currently no law that addresses this. Am I correct?
Correct. So what do you think, Bill? If you walk into a park and you see three identical houses, but one is going to cost you several $100s a month more than the other two.
I know which one I'm going to put in my offer on.
Yeah,
If they're similar properties, it is a red versus blue thing for a couple hundred a month, I can paint.
exactly. So now all of a sudden, person C's home looks like the very best deal. It looks like the hottest property in the park. And person C had nothing to do with that, right?
Exactly.
The landlord has affected the value of the homes. They made one home look really attractive because of the lower price by not using rent reset. And the one who had a 20% rent reset amount for their incoming buyer, all of a sudden that house looks way expensive. All of a sudden, that house looks like not the best value in the park.
And this makes it tough for one of those buyers who may be in an economic strait that, like, we're tapped out. I can't go anymore per month. They can't get out of it.
Exactly, exactly. So now person C has the hot property. Well, person A really needs to leave. They have some family issues, they've got to get out. They have to compete with person C's home and sell their house faster. The only way to do that and to compete with person C's house, who has less rent, is to lower their asking price to offset that difference of the rent increase and rent reset on the incoming buyer. So, person A in this scenario needs to lower her asking price by $40,500 to compete with person C's house due to that 20% rent reset.
Now, I'll jump in here. This is realistic numbers, right? We're not going with hyperbole. These are actual numbers. We have heard stories during our survey. I've personally have talked to tenants who are in tears because this is happening. This is not a what if made up situation. I want to make sure we're clear on that. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
23% of our survey respondents said that their parks and marinas were currently raising rents during rent reset by over $200 each time that home sells. So we're talking here, these rents that we mentioned a moment ago, person A's 20% rent reset was $242 a month. So again, 3% of our respondents said that they were seeing their park charge more than 200, and a 10% rent reset amount for that person B's home that ended up being $121 per month of a rent increase. And in our survey, 9% of our respondents were said that their parks were increasing rent between $100 and $200 every time a house sells in their park. So absolutely realistic numbers based on what's happening right now in Oregon parks and marinas.
And I think it's appropriate to say the rent reset is one thing. Then you have the rent increase, which
Mhm.
is mandated at 10%. I experienced that when I bought my home here in this park. It was listed at a price, and the rent was, let's say, for the sake of discussion, 675. And when I went to sign my agreement, it was in the sevens. It was 730, I think.
Yeah.
And then 2 months into it, rent time. It's time for that 10%. And I'm up another 10% on top of that. And it's not a special case. This is something happening daily. And this is why we went to our legislators. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate the work you're doing. God bless you. There's some other interesting people who don't seem to think this is a good idea. And let's talk some more numbers and see if we can perhaps convince them that fairness in housing is not a bad concept.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about that person A in this scenario where they need to lower their asking price by $40,500. Remember that initial asking price that they were hoping for was $150,000. So now they have to reduce their asking price to $109,000 in
Ouch.
order to reduce that total home payment. So when you think about that, that works out to 27%. That is more than a quarter of the home's value that is now going to be pocketed by the landlord over time with increased rents instead of Anne. And I mean, instead of person A, person A was, I called her Anne in my head. Um, Person A lovingly maintained her home over the years. She invested in a roof last year. She put a fresh coat of paint on the home to help it sell, and she gets none of that. In fact, not only does she not get none of it, but she gets whatever she gets a loss of whatever amount the landlord feels like asking her buyer for.
Let's kind of go to the dark side, if we could possibly go a little darker on this. What happens if, in fact, they can't sell their home? If person A, person B, I can't do rent anymore. I'm tapped out. I'm capped. I'm maxed. I can't go any higher. What happens if they stop being able to pay the rent? What type of legal ramifications are there?
So yeah, this is where it does get dark. And the landlords are counting on tenants not to understand ORS. And they're counting on being able to say, oh, this is not fair. You can't cap our rents. This is our only chance to make up, whatever lost manufactured in their brain, income that they could have for their businesses. So, yeah, let's talk about what happens. What happens if buyers come to that park we were just talking about and they buy person C's house and maybe even they buy person B's house, but person A with that higher rent payment, that 20% rent reset, she can't sell her home in place. It's not attractive. Why would someone pay that much money for the house? And when and maybe she has even things going on in her life where she was counting on that $40,000. Maybe she wanted to give something to her kids or whatever. Whatever the reason is, her dreams are gone because now she can't sell the house because the rent is too much and no one's going to pay that rent. Well, what happens is that person A bears the burden on that. Remember, the reason person A was choosing to sell the home is because they couldn't afford that new rent increase, that first rent increase. They just don't make enough money. What happens when you try to sell your home because you can't afford your rent, but your landlord raises your rent so much you can't sell your home? Unfortunately, you're trapped. The law says you have to pay rent no matter what. So the next step in ORS, the next tool that ORS gives the landlord is eviction. That is what happens the first time person A does not keep up with her rent payments. Um, the landlord is going to file an eviction hearing, and that is the one thing that judges don't really have a whole lot of listening power to hear about is why rent wasn't paid. Judges want to hear that rent is paid. And so a lot of times, if you don't pay rent, and it's just because you can't afford the rent, the judge is going to issue an eviction in favor of the landlord. And what that generally means is that when the homeowner is evicted from a facility, a park or marina, that homeowner has roughly 45 to 75 days to move the home off the landlord's property or successfully sell it. But we've already been through this. They 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 can't move it and they can't sell it because the rent is now too high to find a willing buyer to pay for that home on rented space. So, unfortunately, ORS 90.675 Section 9 says that, quote, if the evicted tenant does not remove the personal property, which is in this case the home, within 30 days after responding to the landlord, the personal property is conclusively presumed to be abandoned, and the tenant shall, except with regard to the distribution of sale proceeds, this is getting crazy technical, I know. I'll summarize it in a second. Then the tenant has no further right, title, or interest to the personal property and may not claim or sell the property. What this means is that when a tenant is evicted, and doesn't have the money to move the house or can't move the house or anything of that nature, the landlord can now take possession of the home and sell it. And the law says, quote, that the tenant has no further right, title, or interest to the personal property and may not claim or sell the property. Now, the law does require that in some cases, the landlord has to sell the home in a quote fair way and give whatever's left over from what is owed to the landlord back to the original homeowner. there are lots of ways around that very vague law. I don't want to give the landlords a lot of ideas on this podcast, but basically what it means is that the landlord's going to get their rent no matter what, and they're going to get whatever rent they want. And if they tell the courts, well, they had the house listed and I was asking $2,000 a month of the prospective buyer, just say a what if. And, I now am entitled to $2,000 a month for however long it took me to sell this house. And then whatever scraps are left over, I may have to pay to the tenant that was evicted.
Well, it sounds like this is a pretty complex subject, so thank you for the PDF, which is going to be available where you pick up this podcast. It'll be in the introductory section. And it sounds like an area which really is complex, but it is vital. It's very, very important in that it impacts not only individuals and their ability to sell their property and get the equity that a homeowner in a traditional home would expect to get, but it also is damaging to the marketplace because I hear there's been a lot of concern of what the future of mobile home communities, manufactured home communities, floating home communities, with rents are going up and up and up because everything's getting more expensive. Yes, but without some kind of guidelines, without some sort of sanity, and this is not, and correct me if I'm wrong, this isn't something that's 5 years down the road. This isn't something that's going to happen next year. I know people in my park, this is next month.
Yeah.
This is happening right now. And I'm hopeful that it may be too late to sway any hearts and minds this time, but let's have individuals who are in seats of power. Let's look at the business community and say, is there an equitable way to do this? We talk about a free market, yet the market isn't free. I can't pick up this coach and take it somewhere. It's it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's the big takeaway is that we're over here talking about this thing. Well, shouldn't the landlord be able to determine what the rent is? I mean, this tenant who's leaving the park, it doesn't even affect them because they don't have to pay that rent. This is for the incoming buyer. But that's just the point, is that it's not a free market and that it does absolutely take money from the pocket of that current tenant when the landlord decides to utilize rent reset to, line their own pockets. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to bring up again, and I put this out in an earlier podcast, I'm going to call for it again. I hear a lot especially in the maintenance area, how much it costs to run a park, and we need this much, and the 12.5, the idiotic, I'm sorry, I think it's idiotic to 12.5% rent increase every 5 years in case of a big project, which means basically do nothing until every 5 years and save it all up for the big emergency. It seems to be I don't see a lot of maintenance happening. I mean, it's not like we're putting in sewer lines or some new lights did finally go in after a year, and that was headed to mediation. My thought, and this is really simple, open your books. Transparency. If I go to the bank and say, I want a loan, they say, what do you got? What's your income? What's your outgo? What expenses are fixed? I've been in business long enough to understand you have to have a capital reserve. So I would ask the big corporations, not so much the saintly mom and pop small parks, because, okay, a little trust, a little love there. But the big corporations, open your books. If money is that tight, if you're losing that much money with a 10% rent increase and zero maintenance, how about showing us? Prove it. It'd be a lot easier to get support.
Yeah, and I mean, that's another great topic as well because, in marinas, there are a number of sort of deferred maintenance marinas where they just keep putting off the maintenance again and again and again. And, there's also the opposite experience of that. So I
Yes, in
I
fairness, there is.
I lived in a marina where things were pretty nice. I mean, the infrastructure, let's say, my landlords were not, but the infrastructure was pretty nice. We had ramps that, felt safe, and we had decks that docks that were safe, and some lighting, and some sort of fire equipment. So we had some really nice you know, basic things. And then one year, the landlord started increasing our rents 10%. And all of a sudden, we were being told, oh, we're getting a new driveway paved. And then we were getting new ramps. And then we were replacing all the dock boards. And then we were getting a new gate and all these new things. We went from having, a really decent marina to something that I would call far more over improved than what we needed. Well, it turns out after increasing the rent for the 60 or so houses in my marina by 10% the first year, and 10% the next year, and 10% the next year, they were putting a lot of that into the infrastructure and into what it looked like, because they then listed it for sale and they wanted to get top dollar in their pocket. But guess who financed all that top dollar stuff that the
Hmm.
landlord then listed and said, look, everything's done. Pay me my money. And we financed it all.
Well, the deep sigh at the end of this is, and I see it here on your document. The
Mhm.
landlords don't want legislators preventing them from stealing tenants' homes and stopping this from being an asset grab. And that seems to be everybody I talk to who's been in a park or marinas. This seems to be a common thread. I turn to our legislators, and again, thank you, Rep. Marsh, and the people on that committee, Senator Golden, Rep. Neron, those individuals who are standing up and saying, "Excuse me," but we need to see some more because it goes right along party lines, and we even have some people in the Democratic side saying, "Well, no, we have to." Wait a minute. It's pretty clear if you do your homework, and I would hope to see all of our legislators not necessarily agree with what we're saying. That's ridiculous. But do your homework, take a look, and come up with a good reason why these things should be happening on your watch.
I would really like to know why legislators think it's okay for a landlord to decide to take $40,000 from a tenant's home when they sell. I can't find in my heart, in my brain, or one reason why any legislator should think that that's okay.
Well, Angela, any final thoughts? Or otherwise, we'll let you get back to taking care of the world's problems in the many hats you wear.
I guess the only thing I would like to say is don't lose hope. I know this is a tough topic, and this is maybe even new information to some of you who are listening. And I know it was a little gloom and doom at parts, but just keep fighting alongside of us, keep mobilizing, keep organizing in your own communities, get the word out, let people understand, because the best thing we can do to take control of our living spaces is to work together, communicate with one another, get educated about what our rights are, and start exercising those rights. Because if we stop exercising our rights, we lose them. And so
Exactly.
now is the time. Just, don't lose hope, get mad and get active, and let's get together and make some changes.
A tenants association is the first step on a really good road. It costs you nothing to form a tenants association. It's easy to do. Even I did one here in the park, and it was like, wow, that was great. We have a podcast. Matthew, our one of our board members, came up with a really good podcast on how simple it is and the value of forming a tenants association. And I've had a number of people who'll call and they say, wow, we're really angry and we're going to do it. And then they kind of,
Mhm.
well, we'll get in trouble. No, you get in trouble if you don't.
Yeah.
I have not heard of anybody, the landlords aren't going to like it, but instead of having one person to be mad at, they've got 50. And
Yeah.
it's harder to take on a group of 50 than it is to yell at you by the dumpster.
Absolutely. I think when we formed our tenants association at my marina, I was the person that worked at it to begin with and got it going. And yeah, my landlord was not happy, and everyone was afraid. They're like, I don't know, I'm afraid. I don't want to. And the more we got together and the more we got together regularly, our group grew, and we were able to affect some really good changes with our landlord
Exactly.
because
Good
they were,
stuff.
yeah, they were looking at 40 of us instead of just me complaining.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was great.
Well, thank you, Angela. I appreciate you putting this document we're going to include, this PDF we're going to share with everyone. Hope to see more input. We're going to be doing more of these podcasts to get more information out on each of the bills idea. Time is short. This week is when decisions are going to be made, if it's even going to get out of committee. And so if you have a person on the committee in your district, we hope you'll reach out to them and let them know A, you're watching, and B, you support HB 3054. It's never too late for a card, letter, and a phone call or a hey howdy at the supermarket. I'll tell you, buttonholing somebody at Albertsons is a really good way. Oh, Senator Bill, harumph, harumph, yes. It's a really good way in a positive. And again, people, let's be nice. We're the good guys. I don't want to hear of anybody throwing avocados or kumquats or putting bananas out in front of people. Don't do that. We're the good people. Angela, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. That concludes this week. And who knows, I may be back tomorrow with something if I can put it together. Until then, be safe and God bless. The preceding program was a presentation of Retired Guy Productions.